This meeting is being recorded.
Alrighty, hello everyone. Welcome to webinar 4 of our Indian Energy Minerals Forum 2022 series. This one is on CO2 sequestration and carbon capture on tribal lands. So this is presented and moderated by Derek Washman and Steve Gray of Sagebrush Hill Group. And just a little bit about us at USDA. I'm Michelle Littlefield, Program Coordinator with the Consensus Program, formerly named Building Consensus on Carbon Capture, Utilization, and Sequestration. So this webinar is right down our alley. This is a cooperative agreement with the Department of Energy, Fossil Energy, and Carbon Management. The program seeks to educate the public, policymakers, industry, and stakeholders on CCUS and carbon management technologies by hosting webinars along with a series of monthly educational briefings such as these. Conference workshops, technical reports, and we have a bi-monthly news clips of CCUS and carbon management related updates. So our next issue will be out on June 15th. To join the mailing list, feel free to send an email to the address at the bottom of your screen. So during our presentations, feel free to use the raise your hand button or the Q&A button during the presentations, and we'll have them answered throughout the actual presentations themselves. Thank you for joining us live. Unfortunately, only part of this recording will be available on YouTube. And with that, I will pass along to Derek and Steve of Sagebrush Hill. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and good morning, everybody. This is Derek Watron. As Michelle mentioned, I am the president and owner of Sagebrush Hill Group, LLC. I and Steve Gray have been commissioned, as Michelle alluded to present these tribal energy webinars. And so today is webinar number 3, and it's on carbon sequestration and carbon capture. And we have two great, excellent guests here. And so I'll have Steve get into the details, but from an overview standpoint, Sagebrush Hill Group, LLC, a Navajo-owned company, has a contract with the U.S. Energy Association, along with the Department of Energy's Fossil Energy and Carbon Management Group. And the objective of these webinars is to provide some meaningful, well thought out information for our tribes. I'm Navajo myself, and Navajo for many years is considered and has been considered a tribal or energy tribe. And so Navajo and a bunch of other tribes have been really dependent on fossil energy. And so now we have a new paradigm, we have basically a new mission. And so, what we're trying to do is provide information out there. We hope that will provide tribes, the tribal developers, and our tribal leadership with the information to move forward. And so this is all in the vein of diversifying your economy, economic development, job creation, and all those things, because as we all know, or maybe we don't know, the resources that tribes generate actually fund tribal government operations. And so in many cases, sometimes people say, well, tribes are gaming tribes, and so therefore they have an abundance of cash and capital, but that's only a few. The tribes that are not situated local are ideally where casinos benefit, have a lot of challenges. And so today, we going to provide some great information. So I'll turn it over to my partner, Steve, and he'll get into our program and introduce our guests. And so thank you. And Steve, it's all yours.
Okay. Thank you, Derek. And welcome once again to our webinar series for tribes and tribal entities. We are very glad this session is about, as Derek had mentioned, CO2 sequestration and carbon capture. So it's a topic that we feel was very important for the Indian community. As you all know, those communities that have resources on their lands, as they make that transition, oftentimes they look and say, what is that option? And so talking about the CO2 sequestration and carbon capture technologies, we felt was very important and to the community, the Indian community. As many of you know, the environment today, is not the environment yesterday. We all know that gas and oil is at an all-time high once again. And so that brings a lot of opportunity. You know, tribes for decades always knew that, you know, on their land, you know, the natural resources was there. And once it gets developed, it'll change an Indian community's setting. And so with these national resources there, we want to make sure that we always protect the environment, but we also look at those opportunities that provide economic opportunity with the natural resources. There's also in this environment a lot of federal money, some state money, and a lot of industry money. But as everybody watches today, we see the federal dollars that are coming to it. So we you know, there are companies out there, entities out there that are working, you know, to help make the development occur and utilize the technology. In all of this today, as you listen to our speakers, you'll also hear some of the challenges. Everybody talks about the permitting process and how grueling it is. And in this day and time, when there's a lot of resources like funding, you still have the challenges of the permitting process. And so it's good today that we have our speakers with us, our entities that are out there working on these projects, taking on these challenges. And we look at these opportunities as they either reside on tribal lands or they reside right next to tribal lands. So with that, we have, we're glad that Sempra was able to join us today, as well as Enchant Energy. And so you'll hear their viewpoints about sequestration, about carbon capture, and some of the things that they are working with, but also some of the opportunity that is there for them. And so before I introduce them, I want to give a few minutes to Mr. Michael Moore to say a couple of words, and then he'll come back to me, and then I'll introduce our first speaker with that. So with that, Mr. Moore with USEA.
Steve, thank you very much, and Derek as well, and also Jim and Bob for being able to make this program with Steve and Derek. It's a lot of activity brewing underneath the surface on this area with CCS and energy resources and tribal ownership and lands and activities and interests. There's a phenomenal amount of money coming out of Washington. It's going to find a lot of different pathways. Hopefully, some of those pathways take it to the projects that these gentlemen are working on, and into the tribes that Steve and Derek are from, and other related peoples out there. We're at I'd say a very unique time in history, because I don't think we've ever seen this kind of funding be within reach. Doesn't mean that it's going to be easy to get to, but it's there. It's not been in this kind of form or fashion as long as I've been around the energy sector, and it's been since the early 80s. So I don't have a lot more to add other than great work that Steve and Derek are doing. Glad we get to work with y'all. And Jim and Bob, thank you for being able to take your time with everybody and be here with that. I'm going to shut down and turn it over to you, Steve, and hear some important stuff.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. So first up that we have, we're very pleased to have join us today is Enchant Energy. And we're very fortunate to be able to hear from Robert, Van Engelhoven, who is the Vice President of Operations and Development, and get an opportunity to talk about what they are working on and what they see as they move along down this road. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Van Engelhoven.
Hey, thank you, Steve. I'll get my screen up here. And Okay.
We see it.
Okay. Okay, now okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so as Steve mentioned, my name is Bob Van Engelenhoven. I'm Vice President of Operations and Development for Enchant Energy. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Enchant Energy here this morning, talk about our company and a little bit of kind of our mission here and kind of what we do and a little bit of what we don't do. And then I'm going to talk about probably a fairly pertinent project that we're working on currently under development right now in northwest New Mexico and at the San Juan Generating Station. I'll talk a little bit about that and some of what that entails, and then also talk a little bit about how it might impact the Native American tribes in that area. So with that, you can see here, this is my introductory slide. Enchant Energy is a clean energy corporation providing environmental services to essentially decarbonize the coal-fueled electrical generation industry and to assist in mitigation of climate change. So with this first slide here, Enchant Energy is a developer. We are an energy company, but we are a developer. We provide carbon capture and storage as a service. And I want to just point out, the word service there. It's bold. It's all in caps. It's underlined. And the reason for that is and the distinction that I guess I'd like to make between Enchant and maybe other folks that you're dealing with or working with in this sector of the industry. We are interested in the carbon capture and storage piece. We are not really power plant operators. We are not power plant owners. But we are interested in the carbon capture and the use of carbon either currently as sequestered in geological formation or as a means of enhanced oil recovery. Our intent is to, as I mentioned previously, to mitigate climate change, and at the same time we can extend the life of the coal-fueled power plants, help them to produce reliable, and that is 24/7 reliability, energy production. And then also, I'm going to talk a little bit about preservation and creation of jobs that would come from the project at the San Juan Generating Station. We are interested in large-scale projects. Many of you, most of the folks on this call will probably be familiar with the Petronova project. It was a scaled-up version or a full-scale version of carbon capture, a very successful project in south of Houston, Texas. And Enchant intends to take that carbon capture process to the next scale up, if you will, and create a large-scale decarbonization project at the San Juan Generating Station and at other coal-fueled facilities in the Western United States. And we are also looking beyond the West a bit. We've moved into the Midwest region, but for right now, just mostly focusing on the West and Midwest. And the current technology that we're using is the amine-based technology. It's currently proven out and provides guarantees at 95% carbon dioxide removal from the flue gas stream. And that's the point that can be guaranteed. It actually performs better than that on an ongoing routine basis. It's not at zero yet, but it continues to improve. The technology continues, the solvents continue to progress and develop as well. So what are we doing? We are right now in the process of acquiring 95% ownership of the San Juan Generating Station, which is in northwest New Mexico in San Juan County. just about, I don't know, 15 miles west of the Farmington area. We are in partnership in this project with the city of Farmington, a municipal utility, and they are interested in maintaining their share. They are a current owner of the San Juan Generating Station. They are interested in maintaining their share and continuing to operate, and will maintain a 5% ownership. With the city of Farmington, we plan to, as I mentioned, acquire the generating station and then restore it to previous performance levels. That would be something back in the vicinity of maybe 10 years ago. Some of the plant is not operating at the efficiency that it used to, and needs some rehabilitation and restoration. So Enchant and the city of Farmington are going to take that on as part of this project. That will be some of the first work that we'll actually do. In addition, as I mentioned, we are a carbon capture company, so we'll be adding a carbon capture island, all of the equipment and necessary and infrastructure required to decarbonize the facility to the 95% level, using the amine-based technology provided by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Further component of the project is the permitting of a CO2 connector pipeline that will connect the carbon capture facility, which will be located at the San Juan Generating Station, immediately adjacent to the power block. The pipeline will run about 21 miles northeast to the Cortez pipeline, owned by Kinder Morgan. And so we have the capability that will provide us the capability to provide CO2 to the Permian Basin for enhanced oil recovery. And then in addition to that, as far as the CO2 offtake, we are also partnering with with New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, New Mexico Tech, on the Department of Energy Carbon Safe 3 program. That's a program through the Department of Energy that is in place to characterize various sequestration formations around the United States. And in particular, this one is addressing the San Juan Basin, which is just immediately to the east of the San Juan Generating Station. So it's in perfect proximity for geological sequestration for San Juan. Okay, excuse me, sorry. So why San Juan Generating Station? We are interested in San Juan Generating Station for probably these 5 reasons that you see here on the left-hand side of the slide. Number one is the scale. San Juan is a 4-unit, 914 megawatt coal-fired electrical generating station. So large scale, as I mentioned on the first slide, we are interested in large scale projects. There is economy in the scale up. So the more megawatts, the more carbon, the lower the cost of capture per unit. San Juan Generating Station also has a secure fuel supply. It is a mine mouth plant, currently owned and operated by Westmoreland Mining Holdings. Westmoreland, we're very familiar with Westmoreland. I've worked with them across the Western U.S. and definitely a good company, a good partner for us at San Juan. The other appeal of the San Juan Generating Station is the current emissions from the project. San Juan has been retrofitted with current technology to reduce NOx, SO2, mercury, and particulates. So it's currently operating in compliance with emission standards, and it also has the selective non-catalytic reduction. So to further reduce the NOx, and it is a zero discharge plant, so it's actually an ideal candidate for us to go after the CO2 on. proximity of the storage, I mentioned the San Juan Basin geological formation. Large area, covers, I don't know the square miles, but it covers a huge portion. And it starts at the Hogback Ridge, runs up into southern Colorado, and then down along kind of the eastern mountains around the Santa Fe region. So it's a large basin. So a lot of opportunity there for storage, and then, as I mentioned as well, the connector pipeline with the Permian Basin through the Cortez, which is owned by Kinder Morgan. And then finally, if you look at the map on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see the large blue dot. That is where the San Juan Generating Station is. That's kind of the San Juan County area. And you'll can kind of sense or see a little bit of a hub and spoke nature to the transmission that comes in and out of Northwest New Mexico. The Four Corners region is a liquid trading hub for electrical energy. It provides access northwest up into the Salt Lake Valley in Utah, northeast up into the Denver metro area in Colorado. Provides access into the Phoenix metro area in Arizona, as well as a large portion of Arizona. And then power can also wheel directly to the west into California, and then a bit into the northwest up into Las Vegas and the Nevada region. So from that perspective, it's also an ideal location for carbon capture. This is somewhat of a schematic kind of inputs and outputs diagram, if you will, of our project. So it starts over in the upper left-hand corner there at the San Juan mine. Obviously, the Westmoreland will mine the coal, transport it over to the San Juan Generating Station, where it is converted into electricity. And then once we take ownership of the plant, we intend through purchase power agreements to sell that power into the Western electrical grid through purchase power agreements. Also, another output of the San Juan Generating Station is the flue gas. You can kind of get a sense there of, it's a small thumbnail picture, but you can see the flue gas and the water vapor going out of the Unit 4 stack at San Juan. We intend to duct that over, that flue gas over to our carbon capture island, and put 100% of the flue gas over and start removing the CO2 from the flue gas. We'll clean it up, we'll dry it out, and then the output of the carbon capture island will be fairly pure carbon dioxide, which we will put into our 21-mile connector pipeline that will go up to Kinder Morgan's Cortez pipeline that will give us access to the Permian Basin. And then also via a diverter station in that pipeline, we will have the capability to divert the flow of CO2 from the Permian Basin, or divert from flowing to the Cortez pipeline to flowing into the 10 sequestration injection wells, EPA Class 6 wells that we intend to drill, and via the pipeline network, distribution network that we intend to construct to get the CO2 over to those individual wells. So that's kind of a broad view of the project. Back over on the right side there, there's a couple bullets I want to hit on, kind of things that we'll need, or inputs, additional inputs. We're going to be using approximately 300 megawatts of equivalent power and steam from the San Juan Generating Station. The flue gas will be actually capturing approximately 6 million metric tons per year that we'll capture and compress and transport either to the Permian Basin or to the sequestration wells. Regarding the sequestration wells, we are working with New Mexico Tech, and again, I just want to point out that the DOE has made an award to to that project to prove out the San Juan Basin formation for geological sequestration of CO2 and other gases. The amount of the award was $19 million, which includes nearly $5 million cost share. And then also, I mentioned earlier the Cortez pipeline that will be able to divert via a diverter station and send the CO2 to the Permian Basin. And then maybe a little more directly to the topic here, why the San Juan generating station and what is the kind of the local effect and impact. The San Juan generating station is located essentially in San Juan County. And in close proximity to 5 of the Native American tribes. In kind of northeastern eastern Arizona, there's the Hopi tribe, the Navajo tribe in northeastern Arizona and northwestern New Mexico. There's also the Ute Mountain Ute. Actually, our intended collector line, the 21-mile collector line, approximately 1/3 of that crosses the, get this right here, the southwest corner of the Ute Mountain Ute tribal lands. And San Juan Generating Station is obviously immediately adjacent to the Navajo Trust lands. And then also a little further to the north and east is the Southern Ute tribe, as well as the Hickory Apache, which are kind of almost directly east of San Juan Generating Station in the city of Farmington. So these large industrial projects have lots of socioeconomic tentacles that kind of reach out into the community and will probably affect all of these tribes in one way or another. According to censusreporter.org, in 2019, it showed a general population of San Juan County at approximately 124,000 people. 38% of those are Native American and 21% are Hispanic. Median household income in that region was $44,000, $44,321. And 21% of the population has incomes below the federal poverty limit. So what do we think, or what we think we can do for that region regarding jobs and economic development and advancement? Again, those economic tentacles that kind of reach out into the communities that are adjacent there. So through the decarbonization of the San Juan Generating Station, Enchant Energy hopes to preserve approximately 1,500 direct and indirect jobs related to the mine, the power plant, and the operation of the new carbon capture facility. In addition to that, we will be paying, or will actually provide tax revenue, annual state and local tax revenue at approximately $53 million. It further assures, through the generation of electricity, reliable, low emission electrical sources for the Western power grid. As I mentioned, Four Corners is an electric energy hub, liquid point transaction, so it makes it a very good location with that regard. And we also intend, as noted there, to produce less than 250 pounds per megawatt hour of carbon dioxide. Again, I just want to emphasize it's not zero, but it's as I mentioned previously as well, it continues to improve, and it is a 95% reduction over what it currently produces. Further, the San Juan Generating Station project will create new construction jobs. We expect that to exceed over 2 million worker hours. And those are going to be jobs over a 3 to maybe 5 year period. So they're not short-term jobs. They'll be long-term construction jobs. And as happened when many of these plants like San Juan were built, some of the construction jobs may well turn into operational jobs or contractor related jobs that will go on beyond the construction period. And then we're going to be adding $1.6 billion to the local tax base. That's essentially the approximate cost of the carbon capture island. And then we also intend or hope to maintain, the middle class, these good, solid middle class jobs for tribal communities, providing opportunities, for current residents, but also for future generations of the tribal nations in that region. And then this is my final slide. I just want to kind of reiterate some of our partners and some of the service providers that we're working with on this project. You never do these things alone, and it takes a whole community of people to really bring these things about. And so, first of all, I want to mention again the city of Farmington. They're a partner in the ownership of the San Juan Generating Station. Westmoreland Mining, they'll own and operate the San Juan coal mine and providing coal to the San Juan Generating Station. These next three here, Kiewit Power Constructors, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and then Surgeon and Lundy. This was a consortium of contractor, equipment supplier, and engineer that constructed the NRG's Petronova project. So they have experience in scale up of the Mitsubishi amine technology. Kiewit is one of the largest constructors in the United States, international contractor working around the world. And Mitsubishi is obviously a huge Japanese conglomerate worldwide, with a heavy presence in oil and gas and in particular in the electrical energy industry. And then Sargent Lundy, a global leader in power and energy engineering with a certain expertise they've developed in carbon capture and sequestration. And then for sure wanted to mention the U.S. Department of Energy, major funder of carbon capture technology. They are currently funding our FEED study, our front-end engineering and design study for the San Juan Generating Station. And they're funding the geological investigation of the San Juan Basin and its viability to support the Class 6 sequestration wells. We're doing that with New Mexico Tech. They are the holder of the grant, but they are doing all the technical heavy lift, all of the geology and fault mapping and just innumerable things to do the investigation to be able to classify, meet the requirements for the EPA classification of Class 6 wells. And then also wanted to mention San Juan College, Enchant, and the city of Farmington have a cooperative agreement with the San Juan College, which is located in Farmington, New Mexico. They've launched a carbon capture workshop training program to train the local workforce, and not only on carbon capture, but they have a variety. They have oil field technology, power plant technology, as well as they have added the carbon capture that we've supported them in. And then just a couple others really quick here. Cone Resnick, Enchant has retained Cone Resnick to help us monetize the 45Q tax credits that will come from the sequestration and enhanced oil recovery of the carbon dioxide that we sequester or use for the EOR. And then finally, Sidley Austin, they're our legal consultants for the San Juan Generating project. With that, I believe I am done, Steve, and I can take questions now, or we can have them at the end after Jim's done.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Robert. That was very informative. Let's go ahead, just real quick, before we switch over to Centra. There are two questions, I think, that are kind of relevant to your presentation, and let's see if we can get them answered fairly quickly. The first one is coming from the Southern Ute tribe. They are working on a CCUS project up there, and they say the challenge they face with the grant is showing job creation. They're hoping that it could help retain those existing employees. Have you heard of any specific federal grant funding that can help with the upfront or the reimbursement costs for these types of CCUS projects? That's the first question.
I will confess, I didn't put it in the first part of my my presentation. I had thought about it, but I've been with Enchant a couple of months now. So I'm fairly new with them. I do have previous experience, up to 5 years in carbon capture with my previous employer. And I am aware that there is federal money for this, but I can't off the top of my head come up with, exactly here's what the grants are and here's what the FOA numbers are or anything like that. I do know there is money. We are part of our work with the San Juan College is funded by DOE grants. And I'm not sure if that's getting exactly to the question here, but I know there is an avenue and a mechanism there to support the job creation piece through DOE grants. Okay.
The other question is kind of along that same line. It's more along the Kinder Morgan CO2 pipeline. And they wanted to know, has there been an evaluation done on the projected CO2 that can influence the price and the fees for the CO2 for the CO2 for the fossil fuel industry?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to see that question here.
I'll read it again. Has there been an evaluation done on the projected CO2 that can influence the price and fees for CO2 for the fossil fuel industry? And they're referring to the Kinder Morgan Cortez CO2 pipeline.
Yeah, so there, let me try and answer, but I think the question is there a price per ton of CO2? I think maybe that's what the question is, and the answer is there's a couple of components for enhanced oil recovery. There is a reduced amount of the 45Q tax credit. So there is that piece that adds economic value to it. And then there is also the piece, the benefit of the oil field owner that he is going to be able to, it'll yield additional oil. That was proven out at Petronova. The oil field was about 80 miles away at Petronova, but I don't know that they ever actually completely reached the full output goal that they had, but they got very close to it, I know. So both of those add economic value to the price, if you will, price per ton of CO2 that an off-taker would be willing to offer. I hope that answers the question. There's also tax credit, the 45Q tax credit, which is at an enhanced value for the sequestration through the injection wells. It's at a higher value than for the EOR. So.
Okay. So we got two more questions on for you, Bob, but I'm going to hold off on them. And then when we finish hearing from Centra, we're going to come back and ask those questions to you.
Okay,
So,
sounds good. Thank you.
With that, we want to move right along here and go on next to our next presenter, which is Mr. James Steemer. We're very pleased that he was able to join us today. He comes from Sempra Infrastructure, and he's the Director of Commercial Analytics and Strategy. And so with that, we're going to hear from Mr. Steemer. Steemer?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. A couple of things I'll start before I dive into the presentation. So I want to be clear, as was just said by Steve, I am with Sempra Infrastructure. Sempra Infrastructure is the recently formed, less than a year ago, quite honestly, entity that is all of Sempra Energy's non-regulated utility assets. So there's Sempra California Utilities, which is SoCal Gas and SDG&E, which I have nothing to do with. There is Sempra Utilities Texas, which is the Encore utility, which serves the Dallas-Fort Worth area all the way over into the Permian Basin. Those are utilities. I do not work in any of the regulated business functions. So our principal businesses in Sempra Infrastructure is three business lines. One is LNG, liquefied natural gas, and that's been merged with our Net Zero Solutions group. So that's one business line. The other business line is clean power. And so we have principally in Mexico, largely along the US-Mexican border in the Southwest. We have wind farms, we have solar farms, we have battery projects. And then we have our networks business lines, which is our pipelines and terminals business, which is either associated with our Cameron LNG liquefaction facility in Louisiana, or many of the pipes are in Mexico or the cross-border pipelines. So our networks team has 11 of the 25 natural gas pipeline border crossing pipelines in the US, between the US and Mexico. We also have several petroleum refined products terminals in Mexico as well. So that's the business that I represent. As was mentioned, actually, my role changed a few months ago. I used to be over commercial development for midstream, and now I am the director of commercial and strategic analytics. So my team supports all three business lines. And we have an ongoing project right now related to our net zero group, helping them to drive their strategy. And a lot of the material I'm presenting today is from some of the background, the market work that we've done on our carbon capture and sequestration, or CC, or carbon capture market opportunities. So I'll be sharing that with you today. Our company, by the way, there was an announcement yesterday. We closed a deal to sell 10% of Sempra Infrastructure to ADIA, which is the Abu Dhabi Investment Fund. And 20% of it was sold to KKR. That closed last October of 2021. So that's why I'm saying we're a fairly newly organized company. And then we're 70% owned by Sempra, the parent. Okay. So what I wanted to go over today, and this slide really summarizes everything, but then I'll go a little deeper into a lot of these areas, is to achieve net zero by 2050, consistent with the Paris Accords and other objectives that people have put out there. In our view, and the view of many others, including the Department of Energy and other international organizations, is you can't do it without CCS, because it is very, very difficult to envision a future that doesn't involve fossil fuels in some part of our energy balance, even out to 2050. And I think what you just saw in the Enchant project is a perfect example of that. We need dispatchable power. Renewables is not dispatchable. You can marry it up with batteries, and battery technology today can last for a couple of hours. So that doesn't address periods of multiple days where the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. So we see CCS as being something that is required, and it enables this achieving net zero by 2050. Okay, and it can play a key role in decarbonizing fossil fuels. The CCS market potential, and I'll show this and build on this. It has the potential to really be on a similar size and scale and of importance to the oil and gas industry. So it can be huge. So we see this as a very promising opportunity. Currently, it's very challenging to create economic projects, as Bob didn't get into the details of that, but you could see right there that, they need, I think he said 300 something megawatts of the San Juan station in order to power their carbon capturing technology. That's a huge hit to that output. So it is very challenging to create projects that are going to be economic. And there are some major incentives today. They are tax credits. But there is uncertainty. Those tax credits only last for a certain period of time. And so you have to really stay on top of a lot of these, I'll call it regulatory issues and the evolution of the incentives.
Jim, excuse me.
Yes.
You might want to move your presentation into presentation mode.
It is. Do you not see it that way?
Yeah, we see it not in the presentation mode.
Okay, let me reshare it. So thank you for letting me know. I apologize for that. So I'm going to share in a different way here. So I'm going to share my entire screen. And now I'll go over to the PowerPoint. And is it now in presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay, I had to share it a different way. Okay, thank you for letting me know that, and I apologize to everyone. The US is extraordinarily well positioned to be a global leader in CCS, and that's because of our geology we have. And you'll see that in a moment. We have some big sources of CO2, and we also have the technical expertise.
Jim, let me interrupt you again. And now we can't even see it.
Interesting.
If you go down to share screen, you should be able to select the presentation, and then from there, put it into presentation mode. I believe it's one of the buttons on the bottom right corner.
Okay, I'm doing exactly what we did in the pre-run, so I apologize for that. Can you see it now? And then I'm going to put it into presentation mode.
Yeah, go ahead and click that button. There we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
I see the yellow line now, so that's helpful. So again, the US is really well positioned. And the thing to understand here is geological CO2 sequestration is not new. Okay, as was mentioned as part of the strategy of the Enchant project, enhanced oil recovery has been benefiting from this strategy since the 70s. There is this concept similar to hydrogen that hubs should be developed to reduce the scale of the project costs because there is big economies of scale. But the problem is permitting, and it creates a lot of risks. so for land-based applications, transporting the CO2 via pipeline is most economic. If you're going offshore, though, shipping can be much more economic, and they're looking at that in the North Sea over in Europe. So the keys to success here is to have an inexpensive source of CO2. And what I will show you, what I mean by that largely is that you have a highly concentrated source of CO2. That's one of the challenges that the Enchant project is trying to address, is that when you're dealing with the CO2 coming off of the gases of a coal-fired power plant, the gas stream is fairly dilute of CO2. So you have to spend a lot of money and a lot of energy to get that CO2 into a concentrated form that can then be sequestered. The other key to success is you need land positions with suitable geology. I think this is an area where the Indian tribes in the United States could have a very significant advantage. Okay. You need subsurface expertise, because in the end, you're going to sequester this under the ground. And you got to be very careful about how you go about doing that. You need project management and permitting expertise. And then you also need the ability to utilize the tax credit. Okay. Now, if the laws change, maybe it's more of a direct pay as opposed to a tax credit. But as was also mentioned by Enchant, you have to structure if you're going to bring in tax equity. That's a challenge to the tribes, because the tribes, to my knowledge, they generally don't pay federal income taxes. So their ability to leverage the tax credit is a concern. However, you can form partnerships where that concern can largely be eliminated. So as I mentioned, your large land positions really can support world-class projects. What is very critical about the land positions is you need to have full control over both the surface and the subsurface, including the pore space. This is not like gas storage where you can get a lease for the surface rights. You have to have full outright ownership in fee under the current regulatory regimes. Okay. You have to have ongoing monitoring. As Enchant mentioned, they're going to drill some monitoring wells. And then another benefit or something that has to be considered here is the long-term liability, or using a retirement fund to manage the CO2 in perpetuity. So if you have to partner in order to really obtain the benefits of the 45Q tax credit, the credit goes to the entity that's actually capturing the CO2. So in the case of Enchant Energy, their organization that's literally capturing the CO2 off of the power plant is the entity that is entitled to the tax credit. So you can do some tax equity structures. In our experience, because we used to have a very large renewables business in the US, it's very expensive to do those structures. However, you can structure a project such that the revenue stream can be from a fee structure. So if an entity like Sempra, let's just say, infrastructure, is the one capturing the CO2, that entity gets the tax credit. The CO2 could be transported to a sequestration project that is on, say, tribal trust lands, for example, and then Sempra infrastructure could pay a fee to the Indian tribe for the sequestration. And that's a structure that would allow tribes to benefit from this business and benefit from the 45Q tax credit. So I'm going to stop for a moment and just see if there are any questions. Steve, we're not, I can't see the question, so are we good to go?
Yeah, no, you're good to go.
Okay. Very good. So my second slide here is just, there's a lot on this slide. But the key messages are the CCS processes and costs, they're very well established. Okay, this is nothing new. Okay, CCUS is actually that process of capturing the CO2 before it hits the atmosphere, right? And then the intent is to store it underground, generally in depleted reservoirs or saline formations. Or you can use the CO2 in various industrial processes such as EOR, fuel production, food and beverage production, whatever. As was previously mentioned, your tax credit is different if you're doing permanent sequestration in a saline formation, say, versus if you're using it for EOR. Sempra will not participate in projects where the CO2 is used in EOR. We feel that we know there's a lot of environmental resistance, even though there is a benefit to capturing that CO2. There's a lot of environmental resistance to supporting continued oil production. And that's a reason why we're not interested in those types of projects. The other reason we're not interested in that is that we have our own net zero goals. And if you're participating in a project that then has that oil production associated with it, our view is it works against those goals. We also are not an entity that likes commodity risk. We're really an infrastructure company. And that's another reason we will not participate in EOR type projects, because typically your payment is going to be a function of the value of the oil production. And we don't like that kind of structure. So the cost can vary very much for CCS based on a function of what is the concentration of the CO2 stream. And as that stream becomes less concentrated, your costs go up materially. So those are key things to look at. So if you look down at the bottom here, pre-combustion capture, okay? In those cases, your CO2 mixture can range from 15 to maybe upwards of 95%, okay? An example of that is if you're capturing the CO2 off of a gas processing facility, it's often a very high concentration, upwards of 90%. And then there's a little bit of processing you have to do. Often it's removing the water and things of that nature. And those costs are fairly reasonable. Post-combustion capture of CO2, it's much more dilute. And so you're looking at ranges of 3 to 15%. There are these oxy-fuel combustion captures. These are still in pilot stages. The combustion is done in pure oxygen. In fact, some of you may be aware of the Southern Ute tribe has their Coyote Power project that they are advancing with net power. And it is proposed to use this technology. And then you're at about a 70% CO2 stream. As a result, the amount of energy they need to concentrate that CO2 is a lot less than, say, what Enchant is looking at doing off of a coal-fired power plant. Then you have direct air capture, and some of these technologies are advancing. So literally, there's a technology. It's like carbon trees, or mechanical trees, where you essentially have these instruments that you can pretty much place anywhere, and they take the CO2 out of the atmosphere. Okay. The real advantage is you can put them anywhere. So the thing I want to emphasize there in that green box is if you look at these different options, your cost for capturing the CO2 and ultimately transporting it and storing it, it ranges tremendously from something on the order of $28 a ton to $128 a ton. Okay, so big range there. Now, I mentioned the US is uniquely positioned for a growing industry. And the reason that I said that is that though it's nascent, it has grown by over 200% in the last decade. If you look back here in 2010, there was about 14 million tons, oops, I apologize, I'm going the wrong direction, just a second here, of capacity in 2010. In 2020, that went upwards of close to 40 million tons. And then in the following year, it went up close to 45. So the industry is growing quite rapidly. Now, if you look at all that CCS that's in operations around the world, this is world capacity, 45 million tons in 2021. Almost 40% of that is in the US. And of that 40% in the US, 80% is in EOR applications. And of that, 50% is in the state of Texas. So the US has a huge amount of the global experience in this area, and the state of Texas has the vast majority of that. And the companies that are involved in EOR production in the US have a lot of that capability. The rest of the world has about 62% of that production. There's 12 major countries, but you see none of them comes close. You need to put the top 4 together to get something close to the US. Now, if you looked at the geology around the world, and this is taken from the Global CCS Institute. So happy, you can go to their website, Global Status of CCS in 2020, and we borrowed the figures from there. The US has over 2/3 of the global capability to store CO2 based on the known geology. Okay. The interesting thing here is this excludes CO2 that would be stored in saline formations, which is, we think, a critical opportunity, particularly for non-EOR applications. And we actually have a project, it's called the Hackberry Carbon Sequestration Project. It is in Hackberry, Louisiana, immediately adjacent to our Cameron LNG facility. It is the only project that is in front of EPA, Region 6, and the state of Louisiana, where we have actually gone and drilled a stratigraphic test well and provided all of that data to demonstrate the capability of the saline aquifer that is below our site. And our intent there is to take the immediate load is to decarbonize our Cameron LNG facility and take the CO2 that is currently being vented from the acid gas rejection unit at the front end of the plant, because all of the CO2 in the natural gas stream has to be removed before it can be processed by the LNG facility, and sequester that. And that will be in a saline reservoir. That project is a world-class project that can sequester several million tons a year of CO2 with actually only 3 wells that need to be drilled. It can do about 4.5 million tons a year. So we have in the US a huge advantage because of our geology and our expertise. So if I continue that, and now you're looking at some information here that comes from the Great Plains Institute study that is, again, a public document. I have to be careful, and one of the reasons we're not recording this is just republishing these documents is a concern. But transporting the CO2 to support EOR operations is really the basis of today's infrastructure, with Kinder Morgan and Denbury being the market leaders. And if you look at the map on the left of your screen, you see that we currently have about 5,000 miles of CO2 pipeline in the US. It is virtually all owned by those two entities. And as was mentioned by Bob, the Cortez pipeline is a Kinder Morgan CO2 pipeline. And you can see it actually on the map right here. So transporting is a big part of the cost. There are challenges, as there is no federal agency that has the authority to lead the permitting of interstate pipelines for CO2, unlike the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has for gas and other energy-related pipelines. There's another challenge, though we see environmental benefits of CCS. Many of the environmental groups are lobbying against CO2 pipeline development because they see it as a way to extend the life of the use of fossil fuels in the US and the global economy, and they are not supportive of that. So there are real challenges. The Great Plains Institute did a very comprehensive analysis. I encourage you all to look at that study where they focused on the center part of the country. They didn't look at the coasts. And they devised a hub and spoke system that is, if you were in a centrally planned economy, I guess would be the way to look at it. This is their vision of the type of network that would need to be developed to really have CO2 sequestration be a huge part of our energy and our decarbonization activities in the United States. Okay, so again, I encourage you to look at that study. You'll see, the amount of pipes that are needed dwarfs what exists today. So big investment opportunity there. Another way for the tribes to participate is, as was mentioned with Enchant, they have a third of their 21-mile pipeline going over, I think it was referenced, the Ute Mount Newt tribal trust lands. So right-of-ways is another way to participate in revenue. If I look at the 45Q tax credit, this is the primary revenue source. It is currently ranges from about $35 to $50 a ton. The low-hanging fruit that is here is if you're AGRUs and gas processing, the cost per ton for that is estimated to be roughly $11 to $16, so well within that range. But remember, this is compression and dehydration costs only in capturing the CO2. It doesn't include the actual transport and the sequestration. So you need to have some more headroom here to pay for that. Look at ethanol plants. And there are two big projects targeting the ethanol plants throughout the Midwest, $13 to $30 a ton. So again, you have headroom under the 45Q tax credit. Ammonia facilities, $15 to $21 a ton. So this is really what a lot of the early stage folks who are engaged in CCS are targeting. Some of the chemicals industry can work fairly well as well. But when you then start moving to some of the other big sources of CO2, hydrogen production, refineries, cement, there are some that may be very marginal that might work. The 45Q tax credit may not cover all the costs, but people may want to do it because there may be other benefits, say of producing a fuel that meets the low carbon fuel standards, say out in California, and some other states are looking to develop that. And so you have to start stacking your revenue streams to make this work. But then there's others like the steel industry where it's really challenging. Petrochemicals, it's very challenging. Here we go, coal power, like the Enchant project. It's very challenging to make that work off of just tax credit revenues only. And then gas-fired, natural gas-fired power is even harder because your concentration of CO2 in your off-gas stream is even lower. So there is a significant addressable market within the current tax credit structure, but there's a lot more potential beyond that. So there are a lot of US government incentives for carbon capture in the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. There's the 45Q is there. There's also a lot of DOE money, $100 million for feed funding of CCS projects. And I'm sure Bob can talk to, that's a big chunk of money. Feed projects cost a lot of money to do. So then there's 2.1 billion in loans and grants for CO2 pipelines. That also allows you to maybe build the pipes to a bit more scale than you would otherwise, because it allows for excess capacity to be built. There's 2.5 billion for large scale CCS, to help support projects and hubs that have multiple sources. And there's 3.5 billion for direct air capture hubs. The one thing not to forget, even though Build Back Better Act is not moving forward, there are elements that were in that act that seem to have broad support, particularly increasing the 45Q tax credit. That's something that seems to have some bipartisan support, and maybe that's going to happen outside of any big Build Back Better bill. But the bottom line here is the large scale build out and operations of the CCS infrastructure that's needed is going to require substantial government policy assistance. It's not going to happen on its own. Now I go to my statement around CO2 geological sequestration capacity and how significant it is in the US. Here's a map, and you can look here at where there's very low storage costs. And you guys know where your tribal trust land is, but I think sufficient to say there is overlap. We can look right here at the Four Corners region, and it's significant. And I will say, we, aside from our Hackberry carbon sequestration project, which is in the advanced stages of permitting, our application has actually been fully accepted by EPA. We are focusing our attention on EPA Region 6, because that's where we have experience. And that Region 6 does go all the way over into New Mexico. So we're looking not exclusively, but at New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana. We have done some initial exploration with at least one tribe and believe that there is a good opportunity for CCS on their tribal trust lands. We are looking at several other tribes, and we are in the process of negotiating an MOU with one of them to actually start doing detailed work on a potential project. So given that our assets are largely in the Gulf of Mexico, and then they're all along the border of Mexico with the US, California, Arizona, New Mexico, that's our core focus, but it's not our exclusive focus. We believe anything that can create clean energy that can access the West Coast market is of interest to us, because we see a lot of incentives for decarbonization coming out of particularly the state of California, and then often adopted by Washington and Oregon. So if you look here, there's a need for trillions of tons of CO2 sequestration. And if you look at saline aquifers, which are the cheaper way to do permanent sequestration outside of EOR, I think there's also good overlap here with some of the Indian trust lands. A lot of it in Texas, Louisiana, Wyoming, Mississippi, Montana, Alabama. You can go down the list here. And then on the EOR side, you can see Texas again leads the way, but you got Oklahoma, New Mexico, Utah also in close running. So very large opportunity here. Again, a lot of this comes from the Great Plains Institute study, so I would refer you there for some more detail. So CCS is expected to become a very large industry. The CCS market is got potential when you look at the network that needs to be built out, you look at the number of wells that need to be developed, injection wells and things of that nature. It has potential to be a very significant part of the overall energy industry and can approach it. If you say, if we're going to, by 2050, achieve net zero, there's $170 billion of capital required to make this work in the type of role that is envisioned for CCS, okay? That comes from a Princeton University Net Zero American study on CCS. And then when you compare it over here by 2050, how material in size it could be. Annual revenue, oil and gas is $2.1 trillion. If CCS plays this role in 2050, it's on the order of $1.2 trillion. If you say it's $75 a ton and we're sequestering 15 gigatons per year, okay? You look at it in terms of global GDP, oil and gas is 2.4%, CCS would be almost 1%. You look at how much capital is deployed, it's very comparable across the two industries. Challenge is that, you know, oil and gas is a very mature sector with thousands of companies globally, and CO2 is emerging. Not very many companies today at all, but there is a lot of interest on the part of oil and gas. So we think there's going to be a new $1 trillion industry created. And with that, Steve, I'll leave it up to you. I do have 2 slides here to talk about oil and gas prices today and in the future, if you want me to go there, or we can take questions.
So are you done, Jim, right now, or you're still going?
I'm done with the CCS component, but I can talk to the oil and gas price issue if you would like me to do that. Okay.
There was one question, but you answered it. It came out about the tax credit, you know, and who does it go to? And so you answered that a little bit later on. So they said that question got answered. That was just on the tax credit. But yeah, if you are wrapping up, you know, go ahead and finish up on that last slide that you got, and then we'll take
okay, so
the other question.
I know when we were preparing yesterday, the subject of, you know, gas prices are through the roof right now, $8, $9. Is there an opportunity for coal to come back? How sustainable is this? So we have this discussion internally because of our LNG business. We're dealing with global off-takers on a regular basis. And so I wanted to share with you a little bit. This is just roughly 18 months of history. So the Henry Hub price, yes, it is elevated today. Now this data is, I think, as of the end of March, so it's a little higher today. But if you look at gas, natural gas around the rest of the world is priced off of other indices, particularly a Brent index. So that's oil-based, and that's very common in Europe. And then JKM, which is the Japanese Korea index. So Asia pricing for natural gas is off of this index, which is also oil-based, okay? Europe has emerging sort of its equivalent of the Henry Hub, which is TTF. It's a Dutch transfer point. And so you see, although our prices have gone up because of the global situation, which really consists of 2 elements. One is we've been through 2 years of a pandemic where oil and gas demand plummeted. The industry responded and cut back on its capital spending so it could, you know, preserve itself and be better positioned to return, you know, to its investors. So capital hasn't been deployed. And then we come out of the pandemic and the global economy is recovering. And then we have a crisis with Russia invading Ukraine. And that, with Russia being a major supplier of natural gas and of oil around the world, that's creating another disruption on top of this cycle coming out of the pandemic. So although, yes, our prices at the Henry Hub are quite high, they are a fraction of what the rest of the world is paying for natural gas. And just to show you, this is $30. Here, it's almost $45 a decatherm. So although our prices are high, in part because of the underinvestment in capital that occurred during the pandemic, now exacerbated by extreme demand and globally growing demand, they are low in comparison to what the rest of the world is paying for natural gas. Okay, and you can see that over here with everything on sort of the same scale. And the gray line is a quarterly average. So you can see it smoothed out a little bit. Okay. Now, everyone's like, well, how long is this going to persist? Okay. The one thing that has not changed, the US has a huge amount of natural gas that can be produced at fairly low prices. And low prices, I mean, $3, $4. That has not changed. The costs have gone up because of increased labor, because of increased steel costs, because of the oil and gas companies being more disciplined and wanting to have greater returns to their investors. But that isn't $8 and $9 pricing. It is really more like a $4 type price. And the reason I say that is, go to the one market that is out there, which is the forward markets at the Henry Hub and Brent and TTF. And all of these markets say prices are going to return to more normal levels, and it will be fairly soon that that happens. Of course, these forward curves are constantly moving around because they respond to their forward markets. They respond to current events. No one anticipated that this war in Ukraine would go on for 100 days. Russia certainly didn't anticipate that. So these markets will be very dynamic and change, but it should give you some comfort that the markets are saying, long term, we think Henry Hub is well under $5. It's closer to $4. The Brent curves will come down as well, but you're still looking at $14, okay? Roughly 3 to 4 times that of what's expected at the Henry Hub. And the TTF curve is expected to come down quite a bit, be much more competitive with the Henry Hub. So I'm sharing this. No one has a crystal ball, but this is the markets. And so I thought it would be a good perspective to understand, what the markets are thinking these prices are going to do in the future. And they do not foresee a sustained high Henry Hub price. And with that, there's my information. I'm happy to ask any questions, and I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. We have a couple more minutes left before we close off here. I got a couple of questions. Not going to get through all of them, but if you don't, Michelle Littlefield will work with you to get those questions answered. I got one right now that I want to try to capture. It's here. I think it was directed to you, Robert, but also you can jump in on it, Jim. Is there an opportunity for tribes to build and own and monetize CO2 transportation pipelines across reservations? If so, have you seen examples?
Yes, I think the answer to that is yes. We have, I've been in communication with, I would classify them as midstream oil and gas companies. And they have provided proposals that essentially provide CO2, or they would pick up the CO2 at the carbon capture island, and they'll get it to an injection well or a pipeline or wherever you want to interconnect to. And they do that at a fee for service. It's at so much a pound or so much a ton rate. And when we initially looked at those, they were quite high, quite expensive. Just recently, they've kind of come down again. Interesting that question would come up because we've actually looked at a couple here just in the last week as we've seen some of that price soften just a little bit. So
Okay.
I mean, I think there is that opportunity for the tribes as well to participate as like a midstream supplier would.
Okay. I think Jim answered.
And I agree with that. And we actually have jointly looked at a CO2 pipeline with an Indian tribe on their tribal trust lands. I think, what you have to understand though is, right, jurisdictionally, if that pipe moves off of the tribal trust lands, which in most cases it will need to, then you're subject to different jurisdictions. So there's some complexity, but I don't think there is an issue, and generally, we're open to having tribes participate in equity in a pipeline.
Okay. The other question, I think you each have touched on it, but let me just make sure one time. Has there been any discussion regarding DOE's recent announcement on the 4 region direct air capture hubs that are supposed to be funded?
I'm not aware of a recent announcement. I'm aware of the DOE is funding direct air capture. That's a technology that seems to be advancing very quickly. It's literally changing almost. You see something new, it seems like almost every week. So I think I'm certain that the DOE is interested in supporting that. But it's a little bit like Jim said, the air concentration, you're capturing in low quantities, you're dealing with low quantities, and you don't get the economy of scale like at a industrial facility.
I agree. I have not seen any recent announcements. I know there's a lot of interest. We're actually doing due diligence on several of the technologies. They are all very expensive. I think the thing that we appreciate about them is that you can pretty much locate them anywhere. And so after you run out of your, I'll say, low-hanging fruit, not that it's all low-hanging, but right, if you're particularly internationally, the off-takers put a higher value on your efforts that are within your direct value chain, right? So for example, if we're selling LNG and we show we're buying responsibly sourced gas, we're putting it through a pipeline, and that pipeline is all electrified as opposed to gas. It uses the right pneumatics and other things to reduce leakage. We put it into an LNG facility where we're sequestering the CO2 off of that. Those things are all extremely important, particularly to the European off-takers, and they'll put a higher value on the CO2 that you remove there. But you're not fully decarbonized, right? So then to the extent that you can use the direct air capture technology to then add additional decarbonization, there's a benefit to that as opposed to just going to offsets. But in our case, it will be very much driven by our off-takers and what they require.
Okay. All right. So that we don't run out of time, I'm going to pass this over back to Derek, who is going to summarize the meeting today and close us out. With that, Derek.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And thanks, Jim and Bob. Excellent presentations. And, my takeaway is that there is obviously potential for CO2 sequestration and carbon capture on reservations. And so just from the data that you pointed, a lot of opportunity, a lot of room. And I think you also mentioned, Jim, that some of the pipeline projects, for for whatever, how we look at it, you have to traverse Indian reservations. And so, that could be a plus or a minus, but for these webinars, we're hoping that it's a plus. And so I know that we have several folks that are online here that are involved with tribes. And so obviously I want to convey to them that for those that are working with tribal leadership, to take a look at these opportunities. And as you also pointed out, Jim, there's potential resources from the Department of Energy and partners. And so the point of today's session is just to outline opportunities, and certainly there are. And so the next step is obviously, how do you bring in the team to start evaluating these opportunities? And so we hope to get to that. But today, we're certainly looking at a net zero environment. And we believe that tribal government and tribal reservations are in prime real estate, if you will, to be a part of that. And so I thank you, Jim and Bob, for presenting information. We're going to conclude here in a minute, but our next webinar in 2 weeks, we're going to take the next step to talk about hydrogen and hydrogen hubs. And you mentioned a little bit about you mentioned that, Jim. But for that discussion, our basic question is, where do tribes fit into that particular setting? And so we're going to have some experts talk about hydrogen. And so I'm going to turn over to Mike briefly, just to give some of his concluding thoughts, and then we'll call it a day. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you for a little bit.
Hi, Derek, Steve, thank you, Jim, and Rob as well. Fascinating insights that you've picked up doing the work you do at Sempra, Jim. There's a lot going on there. You've been Sempra's been a forward leader in a lot of the energy infrastructure developments that have been at a large scale in the past, and it looks like you're still doing that. Your work with the tribal community is insightful. I didn't realize that you'd had that kind of contact. That's good to understand. And Bob, very keen on the Enchant project. I've been following that since the guys came to town with the idea with the city of Farmington, and then went out looking for the money and began to assemble the pieces. And I know it's a labor of love, and there's a lot going on there, but you got great partners in that. And I know that from the Westmoreland side, I believe their CEO is very keen because of what it gives back to the regional community. It's not just about making a buck; it's about empowering a region with jobs, with income, with higher opportunities to come with that too. Just not about the project itself. So Steve and Derek, great having these guys. I took a lot of notes and look forward to following up with both of you guys. And with that, Michelle, you on hand there, or okay? What we'll do is I'm going to turn it. Guess what we'll do is we can wrap it up right here. There's Michelle. There she is.
Hey,
I'm going to give it back to you, Michelle. And I think unless Bob or Jim, Steve or Derek, anything else you want to add, but great materials, great insights. I'm glad you're here.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have Sagebrush Hill with us, and they always have such great speakers. I think everyone's gone over a lot of the remarks that I was going to say, really. And with that, we'll go ahead and close. Looking forward to it next time. If anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll get it to the right responder. And yeah, everyone have a great day. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. All right. Bye now.
Bye-bye.